the Oxford American, there was a little interview with William. I'll give you the shortest, most concise quote. William said this: "I pay a lot of attention to words." And I think that's pretty good. So, William Gale.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry. I'm going to read like the first, the opening section of The Lost Country, the book novel hasn't been published yet. This is the book's about a guy named Edgewater who's just been discharged from the Navy, and he's sort of hitchhiking his way back across the country. And the first part starts where he's in Memphis. The court had awarded her custody of the motorcycle. They were going this day to get it. Edgewater was sitting on the curb drinking orange juice from a cardboard carton when the white Ford convertible came around the corner. A Crown Victoria with the top down, though the day was cool and Edgewater had been sitting in the sun for such heat as there was. The car was towing what he judged to be a horse trailer. Clare raced the car to the curb and shoved it into park and left it idling. She was wearing a scarf over her dirty blonde hair and an air vaguely theatrical. And when she pushed her sunglasses up with a scarlet fingernail, her eyes were the color of irises. "What are you doing in this part of town, sailor?" "Just waiting for someone like you to come along," he said. "You ready to roll?" He got in and slammed the door. "Ready as I'll ever be." This was Memphis, Tennessee, the middle of April in 1952. The convertible already rolling, washed out sunlight running on the storefront glass like luminous water. She was driving down a series of side streets into a steadily degenerating neighborhood where winos and such street folk as were yet about seemed stunned by this regenerative sun, and so unaccustomed to such an abundance of light that they drifted alley-ward as if the extended exposure might scorch them or steer away their clothing. Bars and liquor stores contested for space on these narrow streets, and both seemed well represented. They had a stunned, vacuous look to them, and their scrollwork of dead neon waited for nightfall. She glanced across at him. "I hate the way you dress," she said. "I'm going to have to buy you some clothes." Edgewater was wearing a navy dungaree shirt and jeans held up by a webbed belt, the buckle of which proclaimed U.S. Navy. "I'm all right," he said. "Listen, you're going to have to bear with me on this. Just hang in there no matter what happens, okay?" "Wait a minute. What does that mean, no matter what happens? I thought we were just picking up your motorcycle." Well, you know, they were my in-laws after all. There might be a few hard feelings. Here were paint-lorn Victorian mansions where nothing remained of opulence save a faint memory. Rattle-trap cars convalescing or dying beneath lowering elms. Shade tree mechanics stared into their motors as if they'd resuscitate them by sheer will, or raise them from the dead with the electric hands of faith healers. Past a rotting blue mansion with a red tiled roof, she halted the car and peered backward with a cigarette cocked in the corner of her mouth. She cut the wheel and backed the trailer expertly over the sidewalk and down the driveway, bowered by low-hanging willows. "Showtime," she said. All polished chrome and sleek black leather, the motorcycle seemed waiting and coiled to spring, setting alien and futuristic in the backyard. Clare got out and slammed the door. Edgewater followed, climbing slowly out of the car, like someone cautiously easing into deep, cold waters. There were a couple of 2x8s in the bed of the trailer, and he landed them on a makeshift in a makeshift ramp and turned to the Harley Davidson leaning on its kickstand. A screen door slapped loosely against its frame. A short, heavy-set woman had come onto the back porch, and she was crossing the porch rapidly in no-nonsense strides, and she was rubbing her hands together as if in an anticipatory way. Put one hand on that motorcycle and you'll pull back a bloody stub, she said. Hurry, Clare said. He no more than raised the kickstand and angled the front wheel toward the ramp when the woman began to scream. "You ruined my son's life, you bitch," she yelled. She was coming down the steps 2 at a time, and Clare turned and took a tentative step away, but the woman closed on her, remorseless and implacable as a storm front, and slapped her face hard, then laid a hand to each of Clare's shoulders and flung her onto the grass and fell upon her. "Shit," Edgewater said. He had the motorcycle halfway up the ramp when the screen door slapped again, and a man with a torn gray undershirt came out with a double-barreled shotgun unbridged, and he was pumping wax-fed cylinders into it. He dropped one and was feeling wildly about the floor for it. By the time Edgewater heard the gun barrel slap up, he rolled the cycle off the ramp and straddled it and kick-started it, and he was already rolling when the concussion came, like a slap to the head. He went through shredded greenery that spun like windy green snow, skidding blindly onto the street, then across it and through a hedge before he could get the motorcycle under control, and out into the street again, leaning into the wind, and houses kaleidoscoping past on either side like the walls of a gaudy tunnel he was catapulted through. The image street rolled in and out of the rearview mirrors, then the white Ford appeared and followed it at a sedate pace. Edgewater slowed and turned the motorcycle into the parking lot of a liquor store, and she turned in beside it. The Harley idled like some fierce beast that wasn't even breathing hard. She was laughing. "Hard feelings my ass," Edgewater said. "Do you believe this? My brother-in-law had to run out and wrestle him for the gun. They shot the shit out of that tree. Did you see it? I rode through it," Edgewater said. "Oh, baby, you got it all in your hair," she said, brushing shredded leaves away with a hand. They had to manhandle the cycle onto the trotter because she hadn't thought it was wise to stop for the boards. And Edgewater lashed it upright to a support with the rope she brought. "That's twice I've wrestled this heavy son of a bitch up here," he said. "My first time and my last." "You're in a good mood," she said, getting in the car. "I'm not real fond of getting shot at," Edgewater said. She eased the car out into the street and headed north, glancing in the rearview mirror to check was the cycle secure. "You'll feel better tonight," she said. "We'll get you a sport coat somewhere and go out to a really good restaurant. Italian, maybe. We'll get a nice bottle of wine, okay?" "Okay," Edgewater said. The prospective motorcycle buyer lived in a town called Eaton, east of Memphis, and they drove toward it past tract houses and apartment complexes and onto a flat countryside of house trailers and farmland beset by tractors that Edgewater watched move silent down cotton fields that seemed endless. He turned to study her against the slip-sliding landscape. There was a faint blue bruise at the corner of her right eye and a scratch on her cheek. But with the wind blowing her hair and the silk scarf strung out in the breeze, she looked rakish and well satisfied with herself. In the brief time he'd known her, she seemed always to be playing some role, seldom the same one twice. Just a star of whatever movie today was. He'd had the impulse to glance about and see whether cameras were whirring away a makeup man with his potions at the ready. Then as he watched her profile, Then as he watched, her profile seemed to alter, the flesh itself to tear away and melt and run off the skull and cascade down the linen blouse she wore, and the linen itself blackened and rotted, and the wind sucked tatters of it away. And when she turned to grin at him, bone hand clutching the steering wheel like a hollow eye socket, so her skull smoked like a charred landscape, beyond which a faint yellow light flickered and died. Her grinning teeth had loosened in their sockets, and there was a blackened cavity where the right canine joined the jawbone. They were coming up on a white stucco building with a Falstaff beer stand framed by a rectangle of light bulbs. Carolyn's place, the sign said. Pull in here, Edgewater said. What? Let me wait here for you. I have to make a phone call. She'd already begun to slow, but she turned to frown at it. This doesn't make any sense, she said. We're almost to Leeton. You can call from there. Besides, who would you call? You don't know anybody. He was out almost before the car stopped rolling. Pick me up after you get your business transacted. I'll be in there drinking a beer. She glanced toward the sign. Just make damn sure you keep your hands off Carolyn, she said. Edgewater crossed a glaring white parking lot with crushed muscle shells. Carolyn's place was set on earth so absolutely bare of tree and shrub that the stuccoed honky-tonk seemed to have sucked up all the nourishment for miles around. Dancing Saturday night to loud music, a placard in the window promised, but Edgewater was already touched by rising desperation, and he promised himself that by Saturday night he'd be dancing somewhere else. He went into a cool gloom that smelled of hops and cigarette smoke, and all seemed touched by a silence so dense it was almost cloistral. A man seated at the bar watched him cross the room. Edgewater's eyes were still full of the April light from outside, and the room seemed a cave he was walking into. The drinkers seated at the table, troglodytes who'd laid aside momentarily their picks and were taking respite from their labors. Let me have a draft, he told the barkeep. He withdrew a worn and folded $5 bill from the watch pocket of his jeans. The barkeep filled a frosted mug from a tap and raked the foam into a slotted trough and slid the beer across the counter. The barkeep had Vaseline hair parted in the middle and a red freckled face and brown spotted fingers like the sausages. Edgewater took a long pull from the beer and lit a cigarette and sat there enjoying the silence. Even the drinkers at the table were quiet, as if still contemplative of whatever had befallen them the night before. He could feel the silence like a comforter he'd drawn about him. And he was glad that Clare and the motorcycle were rolling somewhere away from him. There was something jittery about Clare that precluded calm. She was always in motion and always talking. He watched her sleep, and even then her life went on, her face jerking in nervous tics at the side of her mouth, her iris-colored eyes moving beneath now translucent lids like swift blue waters. Her limbs stirred restlessly, and he decided even her dreams were brighter and louder and faster than those allotted the rest of the world. Watching her sleep, he felt he'd stolen something he did not want, but nevertheless could not be returned. He felt eyes upon him and looked up. The man 2 stoves down bar was watching him. He was a heavy-set man in overalls whose tiny eyes were studying Edgewater in drunken fixation. He seemed to be trying to remember where he'd seen Edgewater, or perhaps someone like him. He made some gesture near indecipherable to the barkeep, and the barkeep brought up from the cooler a dripping brown bottle and opened it and set it before her. The man then refilled his shot glass with something akin to ceremony. What are you looking at? The man asked Edgewater. Nothing, Edgewater said. He looked away to the mirror behind the aligned green bottles, his reflection dark and thin and twisted in the wonky glass. He took up 3 of the dollar bills and slid them across the bar. Let me have some change for the telephone, he said. "Was you in the war?" the man down bar asked him. Edgewater thought of the concussion of the shotgun, the drifting shreds of willow leaves. "Not in one of the official ones," he said. Change rattled on the bar. "What the hell's that supposed to mean?" He raked the change and cuffed it in a palm and went past the silent jukebox to the rear wall where a telephone hung. He stood watching it for a time as if puzzled by its function or manner of operation. The fist had changed heavy in his hand, and he could feel sweat in his armpits tracking coldly down his rib cage. He turned and went through a door marked "Men" and urinated in a discolored trough and washed his hands and face at the sink until dry on a length of fabric he unreeled from its metal container. Above the sink, there was no mirror, just 4 brackets where a mirror had been. On the spackled plaster, some wag with a black marker had written, "You look just fine." He went out and used the phone, heard it ring in what by now seemed some other world entire. Yet the room where the phone rang was real in his mind, and he wondered out if there was anything missing, anything added, as they painted the living room walls. Finally, a young woman answered the phone, Edgewater's sister. "I'd about give up on you," Edgewater said. "Billy, is that you? Where in the world are you? How is he?" "He's how I said he was the last time you called. He's dying. Why ain't you here?" "I'm on the way," he said. "I'll be there. I ran into a little bad luck." She knew him. She didn't even want details. "You better get here," she said. "He has to see you. Has to. He wants to make it right. He's trying to hang on until you get here." "He said that?" "He said he's trying to hang on until I get there." "You know some things without them being said," she told him, "or ought to. Would you want to go before your maker carrying all that?" "I'm not looking forward to it, carrying it or empty-handed either," Edgewater said. "Well, you and your smart mouth." "I've got to go," Edgewater said. "There's something wrong with you," she said. "If you weren't so..." He quietly broke the connection and cradled the phone. Then he took it up again and held it to his ear. And it seemed to wonder that there was only the dial tone. No news, good or bad, just a monotonous one-note electrical drone, sourceless yet all around him, the eternal hum of whatever powers the world slowly. The eternal hum of whatever powers the world slowly diminishing. He recradled the phone. The man at the bar had swiveled his toe to watch Edgewater, and Edgewater had seen the look on his face, on other faces, and he thought, "To hell with this." He picked up his beer and what remained of his change and moved to the corner of the bar. "You're out of uniform," the man called after him. "I'm discharged," Edgewater said. "I'm not in the service." The man struggled off the stove and drained the shot glass and turned up his chaser and drank, Adam's apple pumping spasmodically. He set the bottle back and lumbered heavily toward Edgewater like a grace-lorn dancing bear. Edgewater wished for a pool cue, magic wing shoes, a motorcycle. "You disrespecting that uniform whether you in or out. Them Navy work clothes, don't think I don't recognize them. What I wore all during the war. You got on them clothes and you're not even covered." "I got discharged," Edgewater said carefully, straining for clarity. "In Long Beach, California. I'm out. I served 4 years and I'm on my way home." He picked up his mug and cigarettes. He pocketed the Luckies and moved further up the bar. "Let me have another draft," he said. "Don't mess with Ed," the barkeep said. "He's bad news." "He damn sure is," Edgewater said, "but I'm hoping it's for somebody else." "How about you fuckers?" the man asked. He approached again and was leaning forward into Edgewater's face. Edgewater could smell him, see the cratered pores of his skin. Veins like tiny exploded fault lines feel his angry, pyretic breath. "While I was over there across the waters fighting and dying, you fuckers was over here drinking all our whiskey and screwing our wives. What about that?" "Hellfire," Edgewater said. "I wasn't even old enough for that war. How about leaving me alone? Fought and died for you. Got medals to prove it." "How about that beer?" Edgewater said. "Maybe you ought to just drink up and move along," the barkeep said. His head gleamed like a metallic cap. "You're not a regular customer." "I might become one," Edgewater said. "Then again, you might not. You was probably one of them conscious objectors," Ed said. Edgewater drained the mug and set it gently atop the bar. He turned to go, but before he took the first step, a heavy hand lay fixed on his shirt collar and jerked hard, and he felt the buttons pop away and the shirt tear down the back. It all happened very quickly. He whirled and grasped the mug and slammed Ed in the side of the head with it. It didn't even break, and while he was looking at it in a sort of wonder, the barkeep, disdaining normal means of approach, vaulted the bar with a weighted length of sawn-off pool cue and slapped Edgewater hard above the left ear. Edgewater's knees went to water and he pooled on the floor. The world went light, then dark. Somebody kicked him in the side and a wave of nausea rocked him. His vision darkened gray to black, and after a while, when he came to, he could hear sirens. The old man is finally dead, and here comes the ambulance, he thought. He looked about. Ed was at the bar downing a shot, and the barkeep was at his station, and the troglodyte seemed not to have even glanced up. The siren went on and on. A wave of vomit lapped at his feet. Edgewater spat blood and pillowed his head on his arms and closed his eyes. They came out of the city hall and Leighton and down the steps into the sunlight. The Crown Victoria waited at a parking meter, and he got in and closed the door. It was a while before Clare got in. She stood by the car, peering in at him, studying him as if there was something malignant, bad news on a glass slide. Finally, she got in. Her jaws were tightened and the muscles worked her, and she clutched her purse as if it were some weapon she might fall upon him with. But the sun was warm, and Edgewater closed his eyes and turned his bruised face to it and just absorbed that and the heat from the hot plastic behind his head. He could hear her fumbling out the keys. The engine cranked and they were in motion. They rode for a time in silence. "What do you have to say for yourself?" she finally asked. He opened his eyes. "Not much," he said. "You son of a bitch, how do you plan on paying this money back? That was a big chunk of my motorcycle money." He didn't say anything. "You beat anything I ever saw." Edgewater dug out the crumpled pack of Lucky Strikes the jailer had returned to him. He pulled one out and straightened it and lit it from the dash lighter. He turned and watched the rolling landscape. He didn't know where they were going, but the countryside was slipping away, field and stone and fence. Cows like tiny painted cows in a proletariat mural. A dreadful flat sameness to this western world. It went rolling away to where the blue horizon and bluer sky were demarcated by windrowed reefs of salmon-colored clouds. "You wouldn't even have called me. I had to go looking for you in that terrible bar and hear about you picking a fight with some war veteran. What's the matter with you? I should have just let you rot there." He seemed not to have heard. Beyond the window glass, a man clutching the handles of a turning plow went down a black field so distant he seemed in some illusory manner to be pushing plow and mules before him. Edgewater wondered what his life was like, what his wife said to him when he came in from the field, what they talked about across the supper table. He would have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Later he would tell them a story as their eyelids grew heavy and sleep eddied about them like encroaching waters. A flock of blackbirds tilted and cartwheeled and spun like random debris the wind was driving before it. I know as well as anything you did it deliberately, she said. Set this whole thing up. You couldn't just walk away like anybody else. You had to get yourself locked up and ruin the nice dinner plans I had made and waste all that money. Is there much more of this? Edgewater said. I've just about had it with you, and on top of everything else, you're the coldest human being I've ever seen, and I've seen some cold ones. I'll get out anywhere along here, Edgewater said. What? Let me out of the car. She locked the brakes and the car slid to the shoulder of the road and sat rocking on its shocks. Edgewater got out. A car was approaching behind him. He turned and stuck out a thumb. In the sun, the car seemed to be warping up out of the blacktop road itself, swift and gleaming and shifting through transient stages as if it had not yet assumed its true form. It shot by without slowing in a wake of dust and roadside paper that rose and subsided furtively to earth. He went on. After a time, she put the Ford in gear and followed along beside him until he went down the embankment and climbed through a barbed wire fence and started across the field. She stopped the car then and shouted at him, then gathered an armful of stones and began to hurl them at him. But her aim was poor, and the stones fell wide, as did the curses she cast, and in the end were just words, and he had heard them all so often they had become powerless. He went on. How much,
I don't know, when are we supposed to be done here? I don't know. I'm supposed to know this, I guess. 11:40. So you got 35 minutes, but you quit whenever you're ready to quit. Let's ask you questions, okay?
well, if there's that much time, there's just a few more pages.
Great,
There's
yeah.
seven. I'll go ahead and
Yeah, I want to hear
finish
it.
that off. Night. Cold vapors swirled the earth like ground fog. Midnight maybe, perhaps later. It scarcely seemed to matter. The last ride had led him out on this road hours ago, and he walked through a country which in these shuttered hours seemed uninhabited. Not even a dog barked, just a steady cacophony of insects from the woods that fell silent at his approach and rose again with his passage. An owl from some timbered hollow so distant he might have dreamed it. Nothing on this road, and he thought he'd taken a wrong turn, but then it occurred to him that on a journey such as this, there are no wrong turns. If all destinations are one, it matters little which road you take. The pale road was awash with moonlight as far as he could see, and in these clockless hours when the edges of things blur, and the mind tugs gently at its moorings, it seemed to him that the road had never been traversed before, and once his footfalls honed away, faint and fainter to ultimate nothingness that would never be used again. The moon rose, ascended through curdled clouds of silver and violet. His shadow appeared, long and ungainly, jerked along on invisible wires, a misbegotten familiar who was following down this moonlit road. It had grown cold with the fall of night, and he thought with regret of his coat and blanket at Clare's apartment, but there was nothing for that. He looked both up and down the empty road, but source and destination faded into the same still silver mist. He left the road and angled cautiously through brush and blackberry briars into the woods. The passage of an hour had him before a huge bonfire, the piles of leaf stumps and deadfall branches and uprooted cedar fence posts with stubs of wire still appended, roaring like a freight train, and sparks and flaming leaves cascading upward in a funnel of pure heat. He warmed a while, then seated himself on a length of log and unpocketed and unwrapped a candy bar and ate it in tiny bites, forcing himself to chew slowly, making it last. There were 2 cigarettes remaining in the pack, and he lit one and took the other carefully aside for morning. When he finished the cigarette, he built up the fire and lay down with the log for a pillow. Out of the dark, a whippoorwill called 3 times and ceased. After a time, another called from a distant part of the wood, but the first remained silent as if he'd said all there was to say. Edgewater closed his eyes, and for a time images of the day lost drifted through his mind like a disjointed film he was watching. Slowly he settled into sleep. His dreams were troubled, and he tried to wake but could not. In the dream, he was in a Mexican hotel room. There was a bed, a basin, a chest of drawers. From rooms up and down the hall came shouts and raucous laughter, but no one was laughing here. Here something had gone awry. The girl on the bed was leaking, spread-eagled on spreading scarlet as if her white body lay on an enormous American Beauty rose that grew as malign and ill-formed as cancer. The old woman and her smock assistant were preparing to flee. Rats who'd choose any ship but this one. The woman said something in Spanish he didn't understand, and the man mimicked her hasty exit and left the door ajar. And before he fled himself, he leaned closely into her face and watched the fluttering of her eyelids and cupped his hand as if he'd contain her. And don't, he said, don't, as if dying was a matter you had any say in. He wanted out of the room and out of this dream, and he went down the hall, opening doors upon startled participants in their various couplings, and a girl on hands and knees being mounted by her lover like a dog turned and studied him calmly over her shoulder with breast pendulum between her distended arms and her hair falling like a black waterfall. She looked away and Edgewater closed the door. In the room next, the sailor was emptying a bottle of rose hair oil into the gray thatched vagina of an old woman, and the next, a man turned to blow out the match he'd fired the window curtains with, and he grinned at Edgewater and winked while behind him the gauzy curtains climbed the walls like flaming morning glories, and the rose-dappled wallpaper curled and smoked and stank like burning flesh. His father and his sister were in the next room, the old man abed and the sister attendant. His caved face, the death room smell, the eyes of some old predator who'd crawled into his den to die. She turned from her ministering with a damp cloth in her hand, and Edgewater saw that the old man had been berating her, and she was crying. She dropped the cloth, she turned away and leaned against the plaster. Undone, she wept against lime-green walls. Finally, she turned upon her brother such a look of sadness and loss that he wept despite himself. If you weren't so, she said, and he closed the door in her face. Before the last door, he stood holding the last doorknob. It was hot to the touch and seemed to vibrate beneath his fingers, and something was holding it on the other side of the door. He realized that beyond this door lay whatever the other rooms had been preparing him for. He stilled his nerve and took a deep breath of the smoky air and twisted the doorknob hard and shoved the door open and fell into the room. He woke shaking and appalled, and for a moment he didn't know where he was, where he'd been. He wiped a hand across his mouth. He held his face in his palms. God, he said, God. He raised his face and hugged himself against the cold. The fire had burned to a feathery white ash that rose and drifted in what breeze there was, and there was a steely quality to the blue-gray light that stood between the trees. Objects were softly emergent, tree and stump and moss-grown stone, and to Edgewater these objects seemed not to be attaining mere visibility, but existence, things that were being born into the world for the first time before his eyes, and he studied these things in a kind of amused wonder. He had a thought toward rebuilding the fire, but more than warmth, he wanted to quit of this glade of dreams, and he paused only long enough to rake the ash away until he found a glowing coal to light his cigarette. When he came out of the woods onto the roadbed, there was already a faint roseate glow in the east, and he went on toward it through the first tentative bird songs. The world was awakening. All sounds were clear and equidistant. Somewhere a cock heralded the dawn, On some unseen road, a lumbering truck shifted gears. A red rim of sun crept above the trees and consumed the horizon with gold and silver light. Hunger lay in his stomach like a fist-sized chunk of teeth and claws and broken bones, but his heart was lifting and his feet felt fleeting light. This day was new and unused, and this day was one that had never existed before, and he saw it as a footpath that led into a world that was sensual and many-faceted and complex beyond his understanding. But for the moment he was comfortable in it, and roofs and shelters and ill weathers were things of no moment. He thought the only dwelling he needed was the unconfined and unwalled world itself. That's all of that session. If anybody has a question or anything like that, you know.
Y'all have questions for William?
I have one that I've been wanting to ask since I first started reading your work. What do you have against quotation marks? What do you have against quotation marks?
It seems, I don't know, when I was young, I read a book by a guy named David Scruggs, The Night of the Hunter, that actually made it into a movie with Robert Mitchum starring in it. And he didn't use quotes, and it came to seem to me that the quote sets the dialogue apart or something, and if you don't have the quotes, it's just more natural to me. It's just part of the narrative. But also, and when I read The Orchard Keeper, I noticed that Cormac McCarthy didn't use quotes either. And so I figured it was okay to. If he said it was okay, you can jump on me.
How'd you come up with the name Edgewater?
I liked Edgewater just, it got some problems. It's kind of a troubled guy in this book, and I liked Edgewater because it's sort of not one thing or the other, you know. It's not the water, it's not the land. It's sort of peripheral to it. But I don't know. I just like the sound of it. I just like the word Edgewater.
Well, I mean, he's a sailor who's not very happy with the Navy, so I think there's a connection there.
Yeah, that's true.
That language is so rich and that scene is so beautifully crafted. How many times did you revise that?
I don't think I did anything to that. I wrote it straight through the first time.
It's amazing.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. You know, sometimes I have to revise a lot, but not in that case. I sort of had it laid out in my head and I knew where it was going and just wrote from A to B.
In a lot of your stories and books, you have these, and this one too, you have these moments where your, I guess, main characters, I don't want to say protagonists or anything like that, but your protagonists have these journeys through these backwoods, kind of abandoned almost places. Why do you use that kind of, I guess, visual situation for these characters?
I don't, it's fun to write that stuff, I guess, because that landscape or whatever is interesting to me, and it's easier to, some things are harder, like I don't know, all the rural stuff is easier for me to write than if it was set in a city. I don't know why that is, it's just a way of things.
Mhm. It's that solo journey through the wilderness that I like it, I love it, but it seems to be a common journey that your characters make.
There's a part of the county that I live in that I don't know how many acres it is, it's an enormous amount of land that used to belong to a mining company. And around the turn of the 20th century, there were mines, and they mined the iron ore down there and smelted it and hit a railroad at one end. But then in the 20s or 30s, all that, they ran out of iron ore and everything shut down and everybody left. There were, I don't know, about 20 or 30 houses up one holler, where people lived, little shacks. And since it was company land, nobody could buy it and build a house on it or anything. It belonged to some company in Pennsylvania or somewhere. But that, there was just abandoned country, and I used to go down there and just prowl around. Looking for ginseng, digging ginseng, and it was just interesting because it was so desolate. People. There used to be like a company store, a commissary, a post office, and all that stuff. And now there was nothing. The woods had grown up over everything.
Yeah, there's a passage in Twilight where you talk about the abandoned graveyards, the abandoned cemeteries that died.
Yeah, that's sort of the geography that I was writing about.
Yeah.
Except I kind of upped the amperage on it, it's a lot.
It's a great thing about fiction.
You call that the hurricane.
Yeah.
Where's that word come from?
It comes from the word hurricane. People used to, this place, people called it a hurricane. It was probably a tornado or some kind of storm came through one time, and then everybody would say the year that the hurricane came through or something like that, and then they just started calling this place the hurricane, or actually I started calling it the hurricane.
Is a lot of that still there, or has it been developed now?
It's starting to get developed. Somehow they sold off a few acres of it, and there's a couple of house trailers down there, and it's kind of going away, the wilderness part of it. But it was nice while it lasted. It was like one of the quietest places I've ever been. Just stepped into the woods, and it was like stepping through a curtain or something, going back into the past. You could imagine the people that lived there, what their lives were like.
Have you ever been to Mexico?
Pardon?
Have you ever been to Mexico?
Yeah. I did when I was in the Navy. We used to go down to Tijuana.
For the food, right? For the food, right?
Can you tell us what your writing day schedule is like?
I don't really have a schedule, I guess. If I'm trying to finish something, or if I'm working on something that I know everything about, I work, like long hours, mostly at night. But if it's not working or something, then I read a book or watch a ball game or something.
What inspires you?
Huh?
What inspires you more than anything?
Other writers, I think, who are really good. Sometimes you write something so good that you think you want to break your pencils, you know. But the good thing about that is even you feel sad because you know you'll never be that good. You know, you can never write anything that good. But at the same time, you feel good because somebody else did, and you can read it. It's in the world, you know.
Who are some of those writers?
Faulkner, probably more than anybody else. Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, and Cormac McCarthy. And I used to, when I was young, I used to read a lot of Thomas Wolfe. I read Look Homeward Angel and Up Time in the River and all that stuff. But nobody reads Wolfe anymore. They don't teach him in any college that I know of. You know, it's sort of like a forgotten American writer. And I like Joyce Carol Oates' short stories. I think she writes really good short stories, kind of dark.
How do you feel about being called the Faulkner of Tennessee?
I actually didn't know that I was.
Now you know.
Now you've heard.
I really don't, I don't think like that, you know, it don't much matter, you know, people say what they say.
It matters to me.
Well, Tennessee could use a Faulkner.
Yes.
Do you still have your room with books piled to the ceiling that you've read? Or is that not true?
No, my room is full, it's definitely full of books. My son lives with me, and he's got a lot of books, and the whole house is like overrun with magazines and books. I could never throw a book away, you know, even if I didn't like it, you know, I don't like it deserves being thrown away. I figured somebody would like it. But we've got all the shelves are full of books, and they are like stacked up waiting for new shelves.
Did you grow up in Hohenwald?
Yeah, I left there when I graduated from high school. I graduated from high school and then joined the Navy and stayed gone for 4 years. And then I lived in New York for a while, and I lived in Chicago for a while, working in factories and that kind of stuff. And never really intended to spend most of my life in Hohenwald, but I came back and I met a girl and we got married and I started working construction and wound up living there. I really like it probably better than any other place I've been. So Middle Tennessee is really pretty, you know. The weather. Nice country. I live close to the Natchez Trace, and you can drive up the Trace to Nashville, and it's a great looking drive, especially in September, October when the leaves are turning.
How do you respond when people ask how much of Edgewater or any other character is like you?
don't know, I'm a little wary of that kind of stuff, and I don't know for sure, you know, how much of me winds up being in Fleming, Bloodworth, or Edgewater. But I don't go out town very much anymore because a lot of people think those are real, that they're real people in the story. Some guy told me that he knew he recognized everybody in The Long Home when that book came out. And if there's ever been anybody in Cornwall like Dallas Hardin in that book, you know, I don't know who it was. But probably there's more autobiographical stuff in the book that hasn't come out, The Lost Country, than anything I've done. It's almost like Edgewater was my alter ego sometimes in that.
When does that book come out?
I don't know. There's a problem with the people who published Twilight. They ran out of money, I guess. They kind of went. And I was supposed to. They were paying me. They wanted to pay the advance so much a month rather than pay the whole thing in a chunk. And I was supposed to, once the advance was paid off, I was supposed to turn the manuscript in. But they ran out of money before they quit paying me, and I didn't turn the manuscript in. So it's probably going to come out from somebody else. My agent wants to go to pre-press or somebody with it. But I'm actually working on another novel. I've been writing on that.
How has your life changed for the good, and maybe, you know, since you've achieved success, how has your life changed in good ways and in bad ways?
I don't know. I think probably if I hadn't wanted to be a writer so much, and I'd probably still be married. I think probably that had a great deal to do with my marriage breaking up. We lived sort of like, I was like Pa Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie or something, you know, and then suddenly I was going to writers' conferences and that kind of stuff. It's a little jarring, to be honest about it. But I don't think, I'm pretty much the same person I was. You know, I have fairly simple tastes and still live pretty much the way I always did. It's sometimes a little puzzling as like, for instance, if somebody turns up at my house, you know, from somewhere, from Nebraska or somewhere, you know, or just drives up in the yard, and I don't really understand that, you know, I don't get why people would do that. You don't know what they want. My kids, of course, well, my kids are grown, but they think it's bizarre, you know, that people would actually listen when I talk. My son gets a kick out of it. Because we worked together for years. We started like a remodel and painting and handyman type service. He's still doing it. Not so much.
Well, maybe a couple more questions, one more question? Yeah.
That dream sequence was kind of a little bit shocking, you know, very dreamy. And could you speak to, did you make up that dream out of part of the fabric of the fiction that you were writing? And how does the dream, the place where dreams come from, relate to the place where writing comes from?
I have no idea. I don't know how to answer that. I just, Edgewater's just a messed up guy, you know. I've always liked using dreams in fiction because you can be as bizarre, dreams are bizarre, so you can be as bizarre as you want to when you're writing. And this, the first part of the dream is, he's remembering like a Tijuana abortion scene where this woman dies.
One more, well, let's not leave it on the T1 abortion scene. William, what are you working on next? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you know, you work on novels and you write short stories. Do you do all that at one time, or do you tend to pick and choose and focus on one thing at a time?
Sometimes, well, I think when I was working on Twilight, I stopped 2 or 3 times during it and wrote a short story because I kind of got the idea for a short story and I wanted to write it before I forgot it, you know, or before the edge was off of it, sort of. So I generally work on more than one thing at once.
What happens when you get another novel idea while you're working on a novel?
I just sort of store it away or something and come back to it later. Writing a novel, so time consuming. It probably I don't know. I guess you could work on 2 at the same time, but I've never tried that.
I'll be glad when you find a publisher for the one you read from today.
Huh?
I'll be glad when you find a publisher for the one you read from today.
Yeah, I will do.